one.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bruce Montgomery, and this is my colleague, Tracy Priest.
Hey, everybody.
And we're with The Road to Retail. The Road to Retail, Tracy and I hope to offer tips, insights, and ideas of how small, emerging, challenger, or in some cases, dormant brands can build their CPG business. This is everything from determining whether you're ready to grow online, get out of the farmer's market, or get out of your garage selling to little shops in your town, to how to go about figuring out which retailer to approach and securing this distribution, and then driving your business down with the consumer. The bottom line is we would love to help you be successful by highlighting the many important aspects on this journey to retail. And Tracy and I have a lot of experience and have made a lot of mistakes and hopefully done a few good things along the way. Tracy?
Just a few good things, but yes, Bruce and I have been in commercial operations and consumer packaged goods for 30 years. And what we mean by commercial operations is sales, marketing, trade marketing, mergers and acquisitions, product development, broker management, distributor management, agency demand management. We've pretty much covered the gamut of a lot of experience that we do want to share with you on our podcast. So today we've got some exciting information to share with you. Bruce, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, today, Tracy, we're going to talk about developing your go-to-market strategy. So while it might not be incredibly exciting, I can tell you this is going to be one of the most important documents for you to get written down and stick to it. Okay, so if you think about go-to-market strategy, it's really your GPS that's going to get you from where you are right now to where you want to go. And there's steps along the line of where you can reach out and engage perhaps subject matter experts to help you on something like pricing. But a go-to-market strategy not only tells you what you want to try to do, it also, if you stick to it, it'll tell you what you don't want to do, because it's very easy to get distracted and chase off, after the new shiny thing because it seems interesting or someone returned a phone call. It could be the exact wrong thing to do. So thinking down this go-to-market strategy and then following it is very important. So we're going to walk through these steps here today. Tracy?
So Bruce, I think what I hear you saying is it really requires a lot of due diligence, being diligent, and also being focused as you develop your go-to-market strategy.
Yeah, I would also say the word I always like to use is discipline, right? So you got to upfront put the work in upfront to shape this thing. And it doesn't mean it never changes, but it can't change every 5 minutes, okay? Or you'll drive yourself crazy. And if you think about like going out in a boat, yeah, you got to get in the boat and you got to check, make sure everything's working. You got gas, you know where you want to go. But if you keep like worrying about everything and changing your mind all the time, you're never going to leave the dock, and then you're never going to get anywhere. So we're going to go through these components. Tracy, why don't you start off with, the classes of trade and how people should start thinking about that?
Absolutely. But first I want to say great analogy on the boat.
I'm very nautical in my references.
There you go. So we're going to start at today's episode at 30,000 feet. So the first thing you want to determine is what we call COT, or class of trade. So what we mean by that is, if you have a product that is organic, non-GMO, then maybe the natural channel would be a great place to go, which would be Whole Foods or Sprouts or your natural independents. And then maybe you've got a great, OTC product. Maybe that means the drug channel. We always talk about, though, how expensive the drug channel is. So we do want to warn our listeners that it is a very expensive class of trade to go into. But you want to make sure that the class of trade matches your product. If you've got a high-end, beauty care item that retails for, $29.99, the dollar channel, Dollar General, et cetera, Family Dollar is probably not the place to go. But also, I've seen brands where they wanted to go in the natural channel, but didn't do their due diligence on their ingredients, and then got down the road and realized that their ingredients didn't match the requirements of a Whole Foods or a Sprouts. So they really weren't able to launch into the natural channel. So always keep that in mind to make sure that your price points and your ingredients are a good match for those classes of trade that you want to go into. We also preach a lot in our episodes about being, starting out regionally. So you might want to start out with a regional grocery chain. Keep in mind that a lot of retailers have local programs. So if you're a local brand to a city or state, that's probably a good place to start. Bruce, anything to add there?
Yeah, just a couple of other things. So one of the things Tracy and I've done since we've been working on Road to Retail, and then just through all of our years, is one of the bumper stickers that we've heard from buyers in multiple places with emerging brands is not all brands belong everywhere. So Tracy just gave the example of high-end stuff that's very expensive, staying out of dollar makes sense. So again, think through where the strategy of the retailer is a match for your brand, whether that's regional, like if you have something to do with, seafood fresh caught from New England, maybe the first place you want to go is not Santa Fe. Okay. So you want to think through these things. Another thing around classes of trade, and Tracy will get into this a little bit later, is if you end up having to go through a distributor, you have to know the terms of working with that distributor. And we'll get into that a little bit more when we get to pricing. Tracy, why don't you tell us about the schedules that these retailers operate on?
Yes, so a lot of the major retailers have what they call a category review schedule. Some of these review schedules the retailer will publish, sometimes they're not. That's where maybe a sales agency or a broker can help you with that, with understanding what the category review schedule. But I will tell you that if you miss the category review schedule at a Whole Foods or a Publix, as an example, you will have to wait until, the next year. Also, when you're doing your go-to-market strategy, you need to make sure that you understand these review schedules. So if you decide, I'm going to launch my product in May, but a retailer's review isn't until October, November, or maybe you've already missed it, just realize that you're going to wait until you have that category review schedule. Sometimes the retailer, if you've got really a great innovative product, will make an exception, but that's more the exception than the rule. So really make sure that you understand your category review schedule and know that you are going to have to wait until that review schedule comes around. Or if you've missed it, you're going to have to wait till the following year. And then also in those review schedules, the retailer will provide you when the product needs to be ordered and then will be on shelf. And please plan, to our listeners, I want to tell you this, for that lag time. So for example, Whole Foods, if the review is this month in May, that the product will not go into retail until next May. Now that's probably more of the exception than the rule, but plan on potentially 6 to 9 months before your product is actually on the shelf. Bruce?
Yep. No, that's a great point. The key thing here is all these larger retailers have a schedule of dates, and line reviews, let's just call that the key one. They're not bending for you, folks. If you have a massive new item where there's going to be $50 million spent on TV advertising, or if you have a huge RX to OTC switch, they might make exceptions, but you will pay dearly. You will probably have to pay reset fees, which is where people physically go in and work the shelf to cut in your item. So you keep these dates in mind. And if you end up targeting a retailer that you don't know that much about, but it's checking all the other boxes, it's a regional fit, the profile of their shoppers consistent with your consumer. There are lots of qualified specialty brokers or sales agents that can help you figure out what happens inside these accounts. So let's go on and talk about the other half of getting an item in. So there's really two pieces here, right? So they're selling in the item where the retailer accepts it, right? And that's really just when the work starts. The second thing, which is just as critical, is sell through. Okay, so your product has to sell through. So the key here is you're going to end up with what we call a demand plan. And the demand plan has two components. There's going to be the pressure you put directly against the consumer to drive awareness and trial, right? And then every retailer is going to expect investment in their program. So think of it this way. Your consumer demand plan is what are you doing on a macro level to make sure people understand why your product is good, where it can be bought, and what it does. What are the benefits? The ABCs of consumer packaged goods marketing: attributes, benefits, claims. What is it? What's going to motivate people? Then the trade support is what will you do inside? Let's just pick one out of a hat. Kroger. What are you going to do specifically at Kroger to get your product turning? Now, we're going to talk about trade spend in depth in a moment. Now, retailers, another great line we heard during our interviews was occasionally they'll ask a small emerging company, they'll ask to see your balance sheet. I've only heard of this a couple of times, but it does happen. And the reason why is they want to know you are committed to this launch before you ask them to commit. So, they want to know. It's not like my product will sell itself. It just needs to be on. No, it won't. Okay. Unless you have a meaningful point of difference that I can't even think of right now, you're going to have to create that demand. Tracy?
No, I think you covered it, Bruce. Great points. So let's talk about pricing. So this is a critical piece. We can't overemphasize this enough, that you understand your margins, making sure you make money, making sure that the price that what we call an MSRP, which means manufacturer suggested retail. Make no mistake, at the end of the day, the retailer controls the pricing. We run into a lot of clients who think, oh, well, my product needs to be $5.99. Well, maybe that doesn't meet the margin requirements of the retailer, and it may be $6.49 or $6.99, just depending, again, back to that discussion we just had about the class of trade. Also, make sure that you're including all of your costs, such as your cost of shipping, as Bruce just mentioned, your trade spend, your warehousing. It's just not your cost of goods. Another thing brands miss is the cost of warehousing the product. There's a charge for your manufacturer, or you have a separate manufacturing facility that stores your product. Here's a great example. Bruce and I worked on a brand, and we went out to retail, and later on, after we'd already presented pricing to the retailer, they realized that they didn't include shipping. So we had to go back to the retailer and say, oops, just kidding, our price is really this. So we're sharing these kinds of mistakes with you so that you can avoid them. So Bruce, anything to add there on pricing?
Yeah, just a couple of other things. So if you've been a direct to consumer brand, I can tell you this: if you start presenting to retailers, and this also holds if you're selling on Amazon, if they're interested in your product, the first things they're going to do is go check what your pricing is on your website, and they're going to go check on Amazon.
Right.
And they're going to look at those two price points, and then they're going to look at your price, you're offering your product to them, and then they're going to figure in the margin that they want / must make on your item, and they'll see if they're competitive, right? And if that's going to be way off, you need to know that up front and figure out how you're going to get around that. I mean, you don't want to get into making too many SKUs, but if you end up having to make one a little bigger or a little smaller to give them a unique item so that the head-to-head comparison isn't there, or if you need to tweak your trade spend. But these are realities, folks. So a lot of brands get started out direct to consumer and they're doing fine. But when they figure that they have to now cut in the retailer for their % of margin, the economics start breaking down. So you really need to stress test your P&L on these things. And then also, if you work with a distributor, these distributors are going to have their own markups, right? So there's UNFI, KeHE, and those are not optional, folks. So if you're going to you have your price now, then it's going to get marked up by the distributor, and then the retailer still wants their margin on top of that. So you really need to understand this. Tracy, you're much more of an expert dealing with those distributors. Anything to add there before we press on?
Let me give that's great, Bruce. And let me give an example for brand may have, like, let's just pick this protein brand that I know, and their retail, suggested retail is $24.99. That's what they want to sell it at. Well, when you look on a Unify's website for a natural independent store, the retail is going to be more like $29.99. So an average distributor markup is between 15 and 20%, depending on the category. So you need to make sure when you're doing your pricing that you include that 15 to 20% markup. And then you've got to include then the retailer's margin. So there's a big difference between markup and margin. Markup is what the distributor is going to make for supplying and the logistics for your product. And then the retailer margin is the profit that retail location. So when you get all that said and done, you're in this instance, the retail price is going to be more like $29.99 or even over $30. So I just want to share that that's an example that you need to make sure that you take into account.
Yep. Yes. No, thanks, Tracy. So moving on, another thing you need to have in your go-to-market strategy is all of your product specifications, right? So this stuff is incredibly unsexy, but critical. So your case pack, right? So do you ship in a case of 12, of 6? And then what's your configuration? So is it 3 inners of 4? That gets you 12. Is it 6 of 2s? Is it 2 of 6? Because a lot of the retailers have different inventory targets that they're allowed to carry for each individual category, right? They're allowed, some retailers have caps on inventory investment. So if all you do is ship 24 pieces singles in a box, good luck going into retailers. The other things you need to know your weights of your case. And then if you ship on pallets, what's the weight and size of your pallet? Because all of this goes into warehousing and then the dimensions of each SKU. So when they can do their planogram, for those of you that haven't done this before, planograms are the actual shelf set. And these things are not created by mistake. They are planned out by the linear inch for profitability, et cetera. So, if your thing is 2.5 by 4, write it down. Height, width, depth, right? So you have to know these things. In your go-to-market strategy, you should have scannable UPCs. It proves that you're set up and real and ready to go. The other thing you need to know are special handling details. Is your product sensitive to temperature? And not only just the logical stuff like refrigerated or frozen, but there are other products that need to be stored within a range. So like shipping to the Southwest in the peak of summer, gummies probably be pretty bad if you didn't keep them in something that's at least air conditioned well. You'd have a jar full of soup. And then the other things you have to have are your dating. Do you have 2 years? Do you have 18 months? If you're a perishable, how many weeks do you have? So all this stuff needs to be included in your go-to-market strategy. So you're thinking through it, because if you have a supply chain, let's say you have something that's reasonably perishable and you might only have 3 months, right? If your supply chain is going to take maybe 6 weeks from your manufacturer until it's ready to go get sold, you've lost, half your dating just in transpo and waiting. So that's an extreme example. And each retailer generally has dating requirements that they won't accept products into their distribution system without a minimum amount of dating. And again, that changes by category. Dating for food is different from dating for an OTC product. Tracy?
Yeah, so let me share with our audience today a couple of things that I have seen lately that brands are missing. So make sure, like Bruce said, that you've got a product UPC, which most people get. You also have to have a case UPC. You also have to have what they call a GTN number, which is assigned when you get your UPC and your case UPC. A lot of brands I see lately have missed that. And then you're going to have your case cube, which, and again, I'm going through the new item forms in my head on what's required. And the case cube is your height, width, and length multiplied. So that's a good nugget for you guys. And then also make sure, like Bruce said, that you have your dating. They'll ask for your dating from your manufacturing time, that it's that when the product is produced, and also when it comes to the DC. And then the other thing is the pallet. So make sure that you have your pallet configuration, your tie, and your high. So those are the things that I just see, new brands missing and not getting. And make sure that you take all of this information and put it on what we call a pricing and spec sheet. And you can just create one on Excel, but just make sure that you have all that information, because the distributors will require you to submit that as a document.
Yep, great point, Tracy. And one thing you can do, if you go to shows to try to drum up some interest, you can have just a one pager, two-sided, right? So on the front could be some attributes, benefit claims about your product, pictures of the product, size of the market. And on the back can be a bunch of the specs that Tracy and I are talking about right now. All right, Tracy, the elephant in the room. How about trade spending?
Trade spending. So make sure there's three kind of buckets of trade spending. Basic trade spending. One is slotting.
Hey, TP,
Yes.
tell people exactly what trade spending is in case we have any first timers.
Absolutely. So trade spending is the money that you are going to spend with the retailer to, one, to get on the shelf, and two, is to support the brand. So different from your consumer marketing plan, where you're doing, coupons, social media, events, things like that, that you're trying to build brand exposure to your brand. So trade spending is the money that you're going to spend with that specific retailer. So the big bucket, one of the big buckets, is slotting. We see brands all the time say, well, my brand is great and innovative, so I'm not going to have to pay slotting. You are incorrect. Everybody pays slotting. It is just the cost of entry. So that comes in two forms. One is a free fill, which is mostly like the Natural Channel and some other retailers. They will require you to send them a free case for every store you're going to be in. So let's say you sell into, a 100 store chain. You're going to have to give them 100 free cases before they order one. Make sure that you are, accounting for that in your P&L. Now, sometimes higher priced items, like a higher negotiate something where it's maybe buy one, get one free. If you've got a $29.99, high-end beauty item, you might be able to get away with that. But for the most part, you're going to pay a free fill, or it's going to be in the form of cash. So bigger conventional retailers like a Safeway, Albertsons, a Publix will charge you a per store amount. It may be $5, it may be $10, or it could be in a lump sum. I know some big retailers will say it's $10,000 per item. So make sure, again, that you are accounting for that in your cost of goods and in your P&L. We recommend that on average in your P&L that you account for trade spending somewhere between 15 and 20%. In your first year of doing business, it's probably going to be closer to 20 because of your expense for slotting. Another thing they're going to require is for you to do some kind of off invoice or scan amount. This is what we call a TPR, or temporary price reduction. Sometimes they'll ask for quarterly off invoice allowances. That's what the distributor will ask for. They do pass that on to the retailer so that you get that little tag on shelf that says, this week or this 2 weeks or a month, my product's on sale at $4.99. My regular price is $5.99. You are the one who pays for that. So just so you know, when you're walking a grocery store and you see these tags, those are being paid for by the manufacturer. And then again, they're going to want an annual plan. What else are you going to do with that retailer? It could be in-store demos. It could be maybe an event that they're having, or they may have a magazine. So all these things are going to need to be included in your trade support plan that you present to the retailer when you're introducing your brand. Bruce, did I miss anything?
No, I mean, there's a lot there. The only couple of things I would just add is some other things to keep in mind. Some retailers may strongly encourage you to buy their data so you can see how you're doing. make sure that you don't fall for the temptation to get too many SKUs into the retailer. As Tracy just said, a lot of the slotting is per SKU. It's not per brand. And while as a former brand manager, hey, I'm guilty of this. I want a lot of SKUs. I want a big billboard. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But I can tell you this, the more SKUs you have, it's going to be harder for each one of those to make the velocity sales hurdle that's going to keep you in good standing. So sometimes it's best to go with your strongest. Let's say you have 7 brands, 7 SKUs. You might want to try to get 2 or 3 of your best ones and build it from there. The other thing, as Tracy pointed out, sometimes the slotting is calculated by store door rather than just by chain. And we've talked about this before. Walking into a retailer and testing with 50, 200 stores is really the best way to go. So it sounds great if, hey, so-and-so is going to take me in 2,000 stores. Well, if you're a small emerging brand, you need to really do the math there and figure out what it's going to cost you to fill that order, because you're going to have to make that inventory. You're going to have to ship it. And then you're going to have to fund the trade plan. You're going to have to fund your consumer demand plan. And you might not get paid for 30, 45 days. So there's going to be a big hole in your bank account for a period of time. So you really need to think that through. And then the last thing is, when you get to this point, so let's say in your trade spend, there's other little buckets. If you have a high priced item, you might be asked to pay a shrink or theft percentage, calculate that in. If you go into some stores now, you'll see certain products are in those plexiglass anti-theft boxes. Those come with a cost. Some will accrue, say 1% or 0.5% for damages. You just need to know the cost of doing business all the way through so that your P&L, your planned P&L and your actual, they at least look like cousins, right? Because you're going to forget something just because there's always something out there. And now the dreaded topic.
One thing before you move on, Bruce, please share with our audience the experience that you had with a brand where they offered a variety of SKUs to the world's largest retailer, and they chose actually the wrong ones. I think that's a great story.
A brand we're familiar with that we've worked on went to a very large retailer located in Arkansas. They were building a nice business, and the retailer decided that they did not want to necessarily look like other retailers. So they did not take the top performing SKUs. They took kind of the newer ones that hadn't been proven yet, or some kind of unusual sizes. And it has been a struggle. And they also took them in, I think, all 4,000 stores. So this is a company, well-run, good idea. They've taken some investment money, but to fund 3 SKUs in 4,000 stores and fill that first order. And for those of you that don't know, missing a first order, especially to a major retailer, is literally a death wish. So it's been some tough learning. We will see this fall when the new planogram comes out, how many store doors they're still in. But that's where, your appetite can be bigger than your stomach.
Yeah. I just thought you'd share that story as I go into the dreaded conversation that no one wants to talk about, which is the cost of failure. So one thing I'll start with is, when you go into a new retailer or a distributor, you're going to be asked to sign what they call a vendor agreement. And that vendor agreement is basically going to tell you that if the product doesn't sell, that they are going to discontinue it, and you are going to take back all of the inventory that they have. And when I mean inventory, I mean either at the warehouse and all at the store level. So think about this: if you've got 6 pieces in 3,000 stores and they've got 2,000 or 3,000 cases in the warehouse, all of that is coming back to you. So that is the number one cost of failure. Not only are they going to ship it back to you, they're going to charge you for the freight to ship it back. So, and then some retailers in the drug class of trade will also put a handling fee on it so that when they ship it back to their reclamation center, you're going to pay for that as well as then pay for it to ship back to you. So just be aware that that is a huge cost of failure. Where does that cost of failure start? It starts with a markdown. So the first thing most retailers are going to do is mark down your product 50%. So if you have a $9.99 product, they're going to mark it down to $4.99, and that $5 is going to be charged back to you. So you're going to be paying for the markdown as well as the product to be shipped back to you. So there is a huge cost of failure. So that's why Bruce and I preach so much. Start small, start in a test, start in a regional approach with a small grocery chain, so that if the product does not sell, you're not incurring a huge liability. So
Right.
Lots of people don't like to talk about this. I know our podcast listeners are a lot of founders, a lot of entrepreneurs, and we don't like to think about things like that. But that's part of Bruce and I's role with you, is to give you, the upside and the downside of being at retail. Bruce?
Yeah. So just a couple of other things to add here. So not only when Tracy talks about regional and start small in a test amount of stores versus the whole chain, this also gets back to lead with your best foot. Go with your best SKUs. And if for some reason the retailer wants to get a little quirky, no is a fair answer, folks, because if they make some unusual decisions and it fails, you're paying the bill, right? They're not going to go, hey, that, and that's not being critical. It's just the way it is. The other thing to keep in mind is we've heard smaller brands many times, even bigger companies with a struggling new brand or items, retailers will not double down on an item that's struggling. They will not. Okay. If you say, gosh, if I can just make it to, Halloween, if you have something where the season is sort of around the holidays, if I can just make it there, I'm going to be okay. Well, if it's July, they're not going to double down on an ad in October or November and put that much more inventory into their system. First off, it's going to come back to you and all the things Tracy just said, but also remember what we talked about. These buyers, many of them, they get a certain amount of money to invest in inventory in their departments or categories. Why would they tie up more of their inventory allocation in something that's not working? So it's a dance, folks, but you do have to think of the downside, even though we don't want to. Almost everywhere, you've got a plan B. Just going back to our GPS analogy, if you're trying to go somewhere and suddenly there's construction, you have two choices: stop, which is completely unpalatable, or find another way. So just make sure that you've got a couple of alternatives in mind, or you quickly know how you're going to diagnose those, because the minute an item goes into these stores, and we've talked about this, the clock starts ticking. That is your evaluation period. And you've got 6 to 9 months usually to get things rolling. All right, Tracy, this has been a long episode, but it's an important one because This can lay the groundwork for everything else you do. So let's roll to the big finish.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And please follow us on our LinkedIn page, Road to Retail. That's where we will be posting our episodes every 2 weeks. And then also please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Road to Retail. And we really appreciate you listening. We hope that today's episode was very helpful. And again, please reach out to us on LinkedIn if you've got any questions about today's episode. Thanks again and have a great day.
Good luck out there.